What happens when America's most beloved icon walks into a studio expecting warmth, and instead finds quiet condescension, thinly veiled mockery, and a host who mistakes arrogance for authority? This isn't a story about shouting. It's a story about restraint, about dignity, and about the moment even the kindest person alive decides, enough. What unfolded on The View that morning would end with stunned silence, a broken rhythm, and a walk-off no one saw coming. The studio looked exactly as it always did in wintertime. Soft golden lights, a carefully arranged holiday backdrop, candles glowing behind the glass desk, wreaths framing the windows, and the unmistakable warmth that The View liked to project. Especially this time of year, it was designed to feel safe, inviting, friendly. Dolly Parton noticed all of it the moment she stepped onto the set. She wore black sequins that caught the light without shouting for attention, her blonde hair styled just enough to be unmistakably Dolly, but softer than the stage persona people expected. She waved to the audience, that familiar smile instantly pulling applause from every corner of the room. Joy Behar watched her closely, not smiling, not frowning, just watching. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward first, as she usually did, grounding the moment. "Please welcome the one and only Dolly Parton." The applause swelled again. Dolly nodded, placed a hand briefly over her heart, and sat down, folding her hands neatly on the table. 2. The View mug sat between her and Joy, ceramic barriers in a conversation that hadn't yet begun. "Thank you for having me," Dolly said warmly. "It's good to be here." Her voice was gentle, familiar, disarming. For the first few minutes, everything followed the script. Whoopi asked about Dolly's latest music project. Another host mentioned her literacy work. There was laughter, polite admiration, safe ground. Dolly answered with ease, thoughtful but concise, never self-promotional, never rehearsed. She spoke about creativity, about giving back, about how she never expected any of this when she grew up in the Tennessee mountains. Then Joy leaned in, not aggressively, not loudly, but with that unmistakable shift, the subtle tightening of posture, the slight tilt of the head that signaled she was no longer listening, only preparing to speak. "So, Dolly," Joy said, her tone casual but edged. "You've been doing this a long time." Dolly smiled. "I have, yes." Joy nodded slowly. "Decades, really, different eras, different audiences, and yet, somehow, you've never really changed your image." A pause. Not long enough to interrupt, but long enough to feel intentional. Dolly blinked once, still smiling. "Well," she said lightly, "I've always believed if you know who you are, you don't need to chase every trend." The audience murmured approvingly. Joy didn't smile back. "But don't you think," she continued, "that there's something performative about that consistency? I mean, big hair, sparkles, the exaggerated femininity. Some people might say it's a little outdated." The temperature in the studio shifted. Whoopi glanced sideways. One of the co-hosts adjusted her papers. Dolly didn't move. She didn't stiffen, didn't raise her voice, didn't even let the smile leave her face. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Well, Joy," she said gently, "I've always thought femininity wasn't something to be ashamed of. It's just one way of being strong." Joy's lips pressed together. "Sure," she said. "But don't you worry that younger women see that and think success means looking a certain way? That being taken seriously requires all the glitter?" The words hung there. Not an outright attack, but not a compliment either. Dolly's fingers rested calmly against each other. Her nails, perfectly manicured, tapped once, softly against the glass. "I think young women are smart enough to decide for themselves," she replied. "And I trust them more than I trust labels." A ripple of applause moved through the audience. Joy leaned back, crossed her arms. "I'm just saying," she added, "you've built a brand, and brands can sometimes distract from substance." That was the moment, not when the words landed, but when Dolly realized how they were meant to land. This wasn't curiosity, it wasn't dialogue, it was a slow erosion. Dolly looked directly at Joy for the first time, not with anger, with clarity. "Well," she said softly, "I reckon substance speaks for itself." Her tone was still kind, still controlled, but something had shifted, and Joy noticed it. She smiled faintly as if satisfied she'd finally found traction. "Of course," Joy replied. I just think it's worth examining. Dolly nodded once. Then examine away, she said. I've lived my life in the open. The audience applauded again, this time louder. Joy didn't join in. She only adjusted her mug, eyes fixed on Dolly, as if already planning what to say next. And Dolly, still smiling, still composed, had no idea yet that this was only the beginning. The show tried to move forward like nothing had happened. A producer's voice, unheard but felt, seemed to push the panel into a safer lane. One of the co-hosts brought up Dolly's imagination library, smiling with genuine admiration. Over 100 million books, she said, almost in awe. That's not charity, that's history. Dolly's eyes softened immediately. This was her comfort zone, not applause, impact. Well, honey, Dolly replied, books saved me before fame ever did. A child with a book is a child with a door. The audience clapped warmly. A few people even stood, then sat again as the segment continued. Whoopi nodded, pleased. That's what we love about you. You've always been about lifting people up. Joy's mouth twitched at that. Just slightly, like someone hearing praise they didn't think was fully earned. Dolly didn't see it. Or if she did, she chose not to acknowledge it. For a moment, the studio felt normal again. Holiday candles glowed. The camera moved smoothly between faces. The mugs sat neatly aligned like props in a pleasant, controlled conversation. Then Joy slid her mug a few inches forward, and the sound of ceramic scraping glass was quiet, but sharp. So, Dolly, she said, 2 words, a new tone. Let me ask you something. The co-host beside her blinked, as if bracing. Dolly turned toward Joy with that same polite openness she gave everyone. Strangers, fans, presidents, it didn't matter. Her warmth was habit. Her grace was muscle memory. Yes, ma'am, she said. Joy smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't invite you in. It measured you. Do you ever worry that your charity work, your goodness, is part of the brand too? A hush dropped across the table. Not because it was the toughest question in the world, but because it sounded like a trap disguised as intellectual curiosity. Dolly's smile stayed in place for a beat longer than it needed to. Joy, she said gently, I don't do what I do to look good. I do it because I remember what it felt like not to have. Joy nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Sure, but you can't deny, Joy pressed, that philanthropy is convenient, especially for celebrities. It creates a shield. So whenever someone criticizes the image, the fans say, oh, but she gives away books. The audience murmured. You could feel people shifting in their seats like they wanted to protect Dolly from the implication. Dolly's eyes narrowed just a hair, barely visible, like a curtain moving in a draft. Well, Dolly replied, still calm, if my work helps people, then I don't mind if it helps my image too. But it wasn't built for that. Joy leaned in, delighted by the way the studio was suddenly holding its breath. Okay, but let's be honest, she said, voice sharpening. Your whole persona, sweet Dolly, kind Dolly, harmless Dolly, it's a performance, isn't it? Whoopi inhaled like she wanted to jump in, then stopped herself. Sometimes you let someone show themselves. Dolly didn't flinch. Instead, she gave Joy a small, thoughtful nod, the way you nod at someone you're choosing not to embarrass. Honey, Dolly said, everything we do in public is a performance. Yours too. A few laughs bubbled up in the audience, nervous, surprised. It wasn't a jab. It was a fact, delivered with softness that made it hard to fight. Joy's eyes hardened. No, she said, mine is conversation. Yours is an act. You giggle, you flutter your eyelashes, you play the cute country doll. And somehow, people treat you like a saint. Dolly's fingers folded tighter together. Her bright nails, so perfectly Dolly, pressed gently into her own skin. She kept her voice low, steady. Joy, I've been called a lot of things. Doll isn't the worst, Joy scoffed. You're avoiding the point. I'm addressing it, Dolly answered. Maybe not the way you hoped. That line landed like a clean glass clink. The co-hosts shifted again. One looked down at her cue cards like they suddenly became fascinating. Another forced a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Joy continued, sensing she was close to a viral moment. Here's the point. You present yourself as this symbol of empowerment, but your entire image is built around what men wanted women to look like for decades. Big hair, tiny waist, loud sparkle, It's not exactly progressive. There it was. Not curiosity, judgment. Dolly blinked slowly. When she spoke, her voice was still sweet, but no longer soft. "Joy," she said, "I didn't build myself to please men. I built myself to survive the world." Her words were simple, but they carried something heavier than the sequins ever could. Joy opened her mouth, ready to pounce again, but Dolly held up a finger, polite, measured, firm. "And before you decide what kind of woman I am," Dolly continued, "you might want to ask yourself something." Joy's face tightened. "What?" Dolly's smile returned, but it looked different now. It wasn't warmth, it was composure. "When you look at me," Dolly asked quietly, "do you see a woman who chose her own life? Or do you only see what you've been taught to resent?" The studio went still. It wasn't a mic drop moment yet. It was worse for Joy. It was a mirror. Joy's lips parted. She tried to laugh it off, but the laugh came out thin. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Resent? I'm just tired of watching grown women play dress-up and calling it empowerment." The audience gasped. The holiday set suddenly felt like a stage for something darker. Dolly's eyes moved from Joy's face to the camera, then back, and for the first time, you could see it clearly. Dolly wasn't trying to win. She was trying not to lose her temper. "Joy," she said, voice still even, "I've never asked you to like my hair." Joy shrugged. "Well, it's hard not to notice it." Dolly nodded slowly. "And I've never asked you to approve of my choices," she added. Joy leaned back smug again. "Then why are you so defensive?" Dolly paused. The pause was long enough to make the studio swallow. "Because you're not discussing my choices," Dolly said. "You're mocking them." Joy's face flushed. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Dolly asked, still quiet. "Or is that just what bullies say when they get called out?" The word bullies landed and rolled through the room like thunder. Whoopi's eyes widened. One of the co-hosts actually froze mid-breath. Joy's posture stiffened and her tone turned sharp. Too sharp, too fast. "Don't call me a bully," she hissed. "I'm asking questions." Dolly's voice didn't rise. "That's the thing, Joy," Dolly replied. "Questions are meant to understand. Yours are meant to cut." Joy's smile vanished. For a brief moment, you could see the calculation behind her eyes. Push harder. Break her. Get the clip. And she did. "Well then," Joy said, leaning forward, "let's cut to the truth. You're not the saint people think you are. You're a businesswoman who sold a fantasy. And you sold it so well, people forgot to ask who you really are." The air in the studio tightened. Even the audience, usually eager, went quiet like they sensed something sacred had been touched. Dolly didn't move, but her hands unlinked. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then settled, like someone bracing without wanting anyone to notice. Her smile faded to something neutral, controlled. And when she spoke, her voice was calm enough to scare people more than anger ever could. "Joy," she said softly, "you keep talking like you know me." Joy's eyes narrowed. "I know what you show." Dolly nodded once. "And you keep poking," she continued, "like you're hoping I'll finally snap, so you can feel justified." Joy scoffed. "That's absurd." Dolly leaned in, not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough to close the distance. "No, honey," she said. "That's exactly what this is." The studio held its breath, because Dolly Parton, America's sweetheart, had stopped being sweet. And Joy Behar had just realized she might have pushed the one person in the room who didn't need to raise her voice to destroy a narrative. Joy opened her mouth to fire back, but Dolly spoke first. "One more question from you like that," Dolly said, still quiet. "And we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." Joy blinked. For the first time all day, she didn't have a line ready, but she wasn't the type to retreat. She only smiled, thin, sharp, dangerous. "Good," Joy said, "because I'm not done." And the way she said it made the producers behind the cameras reach for their headsets, because everyone knew now. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a collision. The producers should have cut to commercial. Everyone in the room felt it, that invisible pressure when a conversation has gone too far, but no one wants to be the one to pull the cord. The holiday candles still flickered behind the desk, absurdly calm, as if unaware that the atmosphere had turned sharp enough to draw blood. Joy Behar adjusted in her seat, clearly energized now. This was her terrain, conflict framed as conversation. Dolly sat back slightly, hands resting together again. But the softness was gone. What remained was composure sharpened into something deliberate. Joy cleared her throat. "You know," she said, feigning reflection, "people love to protect you, Dolly. That's fascinating to me. You say one sweet thing, and the audience applauds like you've solved world peace." A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the studio. Dolly didn't react. "I mean," Joy continued, waving a hand casually, "you talk about kindness and empowerment, but you've never really challenged the system. You benefited from it. You played into it. That's not bravery, that's marketing." The word marketing hung heavy. Whoopi shifted forward. "Joy, no, let her answer," Joy interrupted quickly. "I'm genuinely curious." The lie in that sentence was obvious to everyone, except Joy herself. Dolly inhaled slowly through her nose. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't visible, but it was the kind of breath you take when you're deciding whether to keep the peace or finally speak the truth. "I've challenged plenty," Dolly said calmly. "Just not the way you seem to prefer." "Oh?" Joy raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Dolly turned her head slightly toward the audience before answering, not for approval, but for grounding. "I challenge poverty by refusing to stay poor," she said. "I challenged illiteracy by putting books into children's hands. I challenged exploitation by owning my work." Joy smirked. "And you challenge beauty standards by exaggerating them?" A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Dolly's eyes finally hardened. "Joy," she said, her voice still controlled, but unmistakably firm, "you keep confusing your opinion with authority." Joy laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "That's rich." "No," Dolly replied. "What's rich is sitting behind a desk judging women's lives from a distance." The applause this time was louder, more confident. People were no longer unsure which side they were on. Joy's smile vanished completely. "You're deflecting," she snapped. "This whole persona, this 'I'm just a sweet country girl' act, it's manipulative. You use charm so people won't question you." Dolly leaned forward slightly, her elbows just brushing the table. "Let me be very clear," she said. "I've never asked anyone not to question me." Joy folded her arms. "Then answer this honestly. If you're so empowered, why cling to an image that was designed by men?" That was the line. Not because it was new, but because it was relentless. Dolly stared at Joy for a long moment, long enough that the studio went completely silent. Even the crew behind the cameras stopped moving. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but stripped of warmth. "I didn't cling to anything," Dolly said. "I chose." Joy scoffed. "You call that choice?" "Yes," Dolly answered. "Because choice doesn't have to look like yours to be valid." Joy shook her head. "You're romanticizing conformity." Dolly smiled faintly, not kindly. "And you're weaponizing contempt." The words landed with surgical precision. Joy opened her mouth to retort, but Dolly didn't let her. "You know what bothers me most, Joy?" Dolly continued. "It's not that you don't like my hair. It's not that you don't respect my work." Joy rolled her eyes. "It's that you keep talking like there's only one correct way to be a woman. And surprise, it just happens to look like you." The studio erupted. Applause broke out before anyone could stop it. A few people even stood. Whoopi exhaled sharply, half impressed, half alarmed. Joy's face flushed crimson. "That's absurd," she snapped. "You're projecting." "No," Dolly said quietly. "I'm observing." Joy leaned forward now, voice raised, irritation bleeding through her words. "I'm tired of women like you getting a free pass because you smile and donate money. You don't get to avoid scrutiny just because people find you likable." Dolly nodded slowly. "And you don't get to disguise hostility as scrutiny just because you enjoy tearing people down." Joy's jaw tightened. "That's insulting." Dolly met her gaze without blinking. "So is being called a cartoon. So is being reduced to my appearance. So is having my life's work dismissed as a costume." The room was electric now. This wasn't daytime TV anymore. This was a reckoning. Joy raised her voice further. "You want honesty? Fine. I think your whole image infantilizes women. I think it tells them they need to be cute to be accepted. And I think it's irresponsible." The silence afterward was brutal. Dolly's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She straightened her jacket slowly. deliberately. "You don't get to tell women what empowers them," Dolly said, each word measured. "Not you, not me, no one." Joy laughed bitterly. "Spare me the lecture." Dolly's voice dropped lower. "This isn't a lecture," she said. "This is a boundary." Joy blinked. "For the last 20 minutes, Dolly continued, "you've talked at me, not with me. You've mocked my appearance, questioned my motives, and dismissed my choices." Joy opened her mouth, but Dolly raised a hand, not to silence her, but to stop the spiral. "I stayed," Dolly said, "because I believed you'd eventually ask something worth answering." The words stung more than any insult. Joy's composure cracked. "You're being dramatic?" Dolly nodded once. "That's what people say when they don't like being confronted." Joy stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be accused of bullying," she snapped. "This is my show." Dolly looked at her calmly. "That," Dolly replied, "is exactly the problem." Joy froze. "This isn't your show," Dolly continued. "It's a platform, and platforms come with responsibility." Joy's voice rose to a near shout. "You don't get to lecture me about responsibility." Dolly leaned back as finally exhaling. "You're right," she said. "I don't." She paused. "But I do get to decide how I'm treated." The room went deathly quiet. Joy stared at her, stunned. Not because Dolly was angry, but because she wasn't. "I came here in good faith," Dolly said, standing now, slowly, calmly. "I answered your questions. I accepted your tone. I even gave you the benefit of the doubt." She picked up her mug, placed it gently back on the table. "But I won't stay where respect isn't mutual," Joy scoffed. "So now you're walking out?" Dolly met her eyes. "I haven't decided yet," she said, "but you're making the decision very easy." The producers were now visibly panicking behind the cameras. Headsets pressed tighter. Fingers hovered over buttons. Joy crossed her arms, defiant. "If you leave, that's on you." Dolly smiled, sadly this time. "No, honey," she replied. "That's on you." The audience erupted again, louder than before. Dolly turned slightly toward Whoopi. "Thank you for inviting me," she said sincerely. "I'm sorry it turned into this." Whoopi nodded, clearly torn. "So am I." Joy's voice cut in sharply. "We're not done." Dolly paused at that, turned back, looked Joy directly in the eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "We are." And for the first time since the interview began, Joy Behar had nothing to say. Not yet. But everyone could feel it coming, because Dolly Parton hadn't walked out. Not yet. And when she finally did, it would not be quiet. Joy Behar broke the silence first. "You know what?" she said sharply. "If you can't handle tough conversation, maybe you shouldn't come on a live show." The words were loud, defensive, rushed. They didn't land the way she wanted. Dolly stood still for a moment, her back straight, her expression calm, but no longer forgiving. The audience watched in complete silence. Even the holiday lights behind them felt dimmer now. "Joy," Dolly said softly, turning back one last time. "Tough conversation isn't the same thing as disrespect." Joy rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You're just upset because someone finally challenged you." Dolly smiled faintly. "No," she replied. "I'm upset because you confuse cruelty with courage." That did it. Joy scoffed, throwing her hands up. "Fine. Walk out. Prove my point." Dolly looked around the table, at Whoopi, at the other co-hosts, at the audience that had been holding its breath for the better part of an hour. Then she nodded. "I think I will." Gasps rippled through the studio. Dolly reached for her microphone, unclipped it carefully, and placed it on the table. Not angrily, not dramatically. Gently, like she was setting down something that no longer belonged to her. "I came here to talk about music, books, and hope," she said, her voice steady. "Not to be talked down to, not to be mocked, and not to be turned into a spectacle." She looked directly at Joy. "I wish you well," Dolly added, "but I won't stay where kindness is treated like weakness." Joy opened her mouth, too late. Dolly turned and walked off the set. The audience stood. Applause broke out. Loud, sustained, unmistakable. Not the polite kind, the kind that fills a room and makes it impossible to pretend nothing happened. Joy sat frozen. Whoopi cleared her throat slowly. "Well," she said carefully, "we'll be right back." But there was no going back. Because in that quiet, controlled walk-off, without shouting, without insults, Dolly Parton had drawn the sharpest line of all, and everyone watching knew exactly who crossed it. Sometimes the loudest statement isn't made with words. It's made by knowing when to walk away. Dolly Parton didn't shout. She didn't insult back. She simply refused to stay where respect no longer existed. If you believe dignity is strength, if you believe kindness doesn't mean weakness, and if you think moments like this deserve to be remembered, tap like to show your support. Subscribe to Pressure Point for more stories where power shifts on live television. And tell us in the comments, did Dolly do the right thing by walking away, or should she have stayed and fought back?